Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar, which is brought to you by sharedserviceslink.com and sponsored by Esther. I'm very pleased that today we're going to be examining shared services in the cloud. So I extend to you a very warm welcome indeed. My name is Susie West, and I'm the founder and CEO at sharedserviceslink.com, and I'm very pleased to be facilitating and chairing this session today. I'm going to be introducing to you as our key speaker Renee Thomas, who's the Director of Sales and Marketing at Esther. Renee's been at Esther for over 14 years now and has really helped Esther educate the purchase to pay and the finance shared services market on the importance of automation within purchase to pay and finance shared services. So I'm delighted that she can be joining us here today to be talking about developments in cloud computing within shared services. So let's have a look at the agenda for the next 60 minutes. I'm going to be just touching briefly on the importance of questions and then really just setting the scene before I hand over to Renee, who will be getting into the detail of the subject matter, and we'll be taking questions in the last 10 minutes of the webinar. So as far as questions are concerned, you've all come on this webinar today with a very specific intention. I really want to make sure that you get that intention fulfilled. So do make sure that you send me your question nice and early, and I will then put your questions to Renee in the last 10 minutes of the webinar. The sooner you send me the question of yours, and feel free to send me a few if you wish to, the more likely it is to be answered. Do bear that in mind. And really importantly as well, Esther has very generously arranged with us that they should have passes, tickets to our Shared Services Leaders Summit that we have coming up in Atlanta. And all you need to do is look out in one of the last slides for some of the key clients that Esther has. And those that get the answer right in the question, the last poll of the session, will be entered into a raffle to win one of those wonderful passes worth $2,000. So make sure that you look out for the list of Esther's clients. Let's have a look at why we're having this debate today. So all of us as human beings, as consumers, we're taking advantage in our private lives of cloud computing. And we're really enjoying the benefits of cloud computing. It's plug and play, it's on demand, there's no software to be downloading anymore. And there are many other great principles that come with the notion, the model of cloud computing. So cloud computing has been in business for a while, and it's been in business on this kind of the front end of the business. So CRM technology really was the driver of cloud computing. And now it's very much a part of the finance, what we call the back office part of business, and very much the shared services part of business, now embracing cloud computing to help them meet their objectives. And it's so many reasons why this is a very, very popular trend at the moment. The deployment is much quicker, and therefore ROIs are much faster to secure. We all know that finance shared services is very heavily transaction-based, and automation to get rid of that manual transaction component is absolutely critical to achieve KPIs like productivity and cost per invoice, and then being able to transform your shared services organization away from being transaction-heavy and manual-heavy and move it into a much sharper, more value-adding component, delivering real high-value finance and reporting and business intelligence to the rest of the business. So this really is a very, very fundamental enabler to take shared services to the next level. So I'm very pleased that we are really getting into the detail today. So now I'd like to hand over to Renee Thomas from Esther. Over to you, please, Renee.
Great. Thank you so much, Susie, for that introduction. Again, my name is Renee Thomas. I'm the Director of Sales and Field Marketing here at Esther, and pleased to be here with everyone out there. Today, yes, of course, we're going to talk about shared services in the cloud. And I know I'm probably talking to people who are at all different stages of working with shared services. Maybe you are just looking at it for the first time for your organization. Maybe you have been working with a shared services organization for years and are looking to improve. You know, a lot of different stages that I'm figuring that folks are in out there. So you know, obviously, that shared services can offer your company a lot of benefits in terms of streamlining and leveraging resources in key areas. But how you do that, you know, there are a lot of different ways to go about it, a lot of different ways to improve it based on how technology is moving today, and that's where we're going to spend some time. So in the presentation today, I'm going to look at things in 3 different areas. We're going to look at, first of all, AP. That's traditionally a place where people start when they go to shared services. So we're going to talk a little bit about AP, some of the problems people face in AP, and how automation can help. Then we'll take a look at the cloud in particular and how that helps AP as well as shared service. And then we'll talk a little bit about how do you go beyond AP to other business processes, and how can you leverage the cloud to take your shared services center to the next step, offering more business process automation for your company. So getting into accounts payable, some of the objectives that we see and that you should be quite familiar with if you're around this organization much is, you know, you're looking for achieving accurate and timely closings. That's a key thing that the department is all about. You want to, of course, avoid any late payment fees, and probably most important, you want to capture any sort of early payment discount that you can for your company. Another thing you want to do is minimize vendor communication time. This can really take a lot of time of your people on the floor, maybe away from things that are more more value add. But if you're answering a lot of questions about where's this invoice, where's this payment, you know, that's not really very productive vendor communication time, when you can maybe be saving that time for other things within the organization. And then, indeed, you want to keep the supply chain running smoothly. And finally, above all, probably, is just wanting to have that objective of providing the highest level of service in the accounts payable function. And what we see is that in order to achieve a lot of these objectives, it's really a tall order here, and what we see in a lot of cases is that companies who are running a lot of manual processes have trouble getting to all these objectives. So what we find is a solution to get there more quickly and more efficiently is through automation. I'm going to turn it over to Susie for our first poll question of the presentation. So please take advantage of that.
Thank you very much indeed, Renee. So coming up on your screen now, let's just get a read of the audience. What percentage of your invoice volume is paper-based today? So what percentage of your invoice volume is paper-based today? Is it over 90%, 70 to 89%, 50 to 69%, 20 to 49%, or 19% or less? So looking at all the invoices that come into your shared services environment today, what percentage of them are still very much paper-based? We do like to get very high responses to this, to our poll. So if you haven't yet responded, please do so. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's have a look at the results coming up on your screen now. So interestingly, we do typically, when we ask this question, we have seen a bell curve in the past. So you can see a bit of a bell curve there. But interestingly, we do have 13% of you on the webinar today who've actually attained relatively high numbers of electronic automated invoices at 19% or less paper. So interesting results there. Back to you, please, Renee.
Yeah, and actually, they don't surprise me too much. You know, if I'm looking at, if I add up the folks who are in the 70 to 90%, you know, we're getting close to 50% of you out there. So, you know, it's really interesting, and it's something we see every day. Is that a lot of organizations are still very, very heavily focused on paper in this area, even after they've moved to a shared service environment. They're still running a lot of that based on paper. So, that can cause a lot of pain in the organization. And you might say, well, okay, that's just the AP department, that's just the shared services group. They can, they can muscle through it and deal with the paper. But really, if you look at the bigger picture, there are a lot of people who feel the pain of manual vendor invoice processing. It doesn't just make life a little harder for your AP specialists, but it affects all of these different people. So if we look at this chart, you've got your CFOs, and they're looking at the bottom line. They see a waste of money on the entire process. So the cost of a manual AP process, they just will look at and say that's just too high. So they're going to want to look at different ways to maximize, ROI for the whole company. So when they see a non-revenue generating activity that's, that's depleting or, taking up fiscal resources for the company, they're going to really hone in and look hard for something to reduce the cost of that on the environment for the whole business. Secondly, going counterclockwise, buyers are affected if there's an inefficient AP process. Buyers are trying to get, they're trying to lower the supply costs, and they are trying to get discounts for early payment and things like that. But if the AP process doesn't support that or is inefficient, they're not going to be able to achieve their goals. The AP department itself is affected. We kind of talked about that. That's a pretty natural assumption. But, a lot of what that AP department is trying to do is really serve the vendors and respond to inquiries. But if the process is manually driven and heavily laden with paper, if someone calls and has a question about an invoice, tracking down that paper invoice, that could be sitting on someone's desk. It could be out for approval with somebody, in the mail to somebody, or even sitting in a file cabinet at some point. That just makes things difficult for your AP department. The CEO is pretty much in the same boat as the CFO on this. I mean, they're seeing high costs in an area where they don't want to spend a lot of money. So it's true that the AP department isn't likely to ever be a revenue generator, but it shouldn't be an area that also drains company resources. And finally, the supplier to whom you owe the money. Most businesses want to work with a company that's paying their bills on time and correctly. If an invoice is lost and unpaid, that supplier is going to suffer too and eventually affect your relationship. So let's take a deeper look at the manual AP process that a lot of people still are working through in their company. Again, whether you have a shared services arrangement or set up right now or if you're moving toward that. So I'm going to review the steps that are taken during a typical inbound invoice process. So the process I'm going to talk about is for a typical commercial invoice that is generated from a purchase order issued by the company. So the process doesn't change depending on the type of invoice you receive, or it does change, whether it's a PO or a non-PO based invoice. But for the sake of our discussion today, we're going to focus on one that was generated from a purchase order for now. So in the basic AP process, the invoice arrives, and really in most cases we still find that it's arriving as postal mail. So once that invoice is received, someone has to physically open the mail and determine where that payable needs to go, which may be through an approval process. Then someone is probably having to key the invoice information into the ERP application so it can be paid. And at the end of the day, too, you want to make sure were the goods and the services or the services even received. So you're going to have somebody probably who's going back to the person who ordered them to make sure that they did get the goods or services and were satisfied. So then it gets into this approval process. So you're probably going to be passing this information off to different managers to approve the invoice for payment. That could be for whether it's all invoices. It depends really on your company process. It could be for invoices for a certain product line, or if the invoice is over a certain dollar amount. And then in most cases that invoice is archived, and typically, and don't worry if that's still the same case for you, but typically, and we see this all the time, still in file cabinets. So copies are made when they need to be made, but then at some point it's going into a physical file cabinet, which other than taking up, aside from taking up space, makes retrieval really difficult, especially when people are getting phone calls with questions. So let's talk a little bit about the drivers for AP automation. So today, virtually every company, you can see the value of eliminating manual AP processes. You can see that there are efficiencies to gain from that. And if you weren't convinced before, we had struggles in the economy. You should be, at least by now, knowing that that you want to be saving money in really every area of your business that you can. And especially if you've already centralized into a shared services arrangement or shared services organization, you're also going to be probably looking for ways to continuously improve that organization. And that's where you can look to automation as maybe an interesting next step for you. So the AP function, it's definitely evolved from a back office cost center to a strategic target for process improvement for initiatives like this. And interestingly enough, industry analysts have reported that as much as 80% of AP processing time is spent on routing of vendor invoices. So companies that have not automated need a bunch of people to run around and make sure that they get the necessary sign-offs and approvals to authorize the payment of invoices. And that can be a huge time waster in your organization and can also result in lost invoices. I mentioned before late payments, missed discounts, things like that. So knowing where an invoice is in the approval process, having that visibility, and being able to escalate payment of invoices from top vendors is another example of prioritization, can really be critical for your company. And manual order processing doesn't help you do that. It doesn't give you the visibility that you need to make those improvements. So as you look at the list here, I didn't read through every bullet, but it gives you an idea of the common motivators that companies that are behind companies' initiatives to automate their AP processing. And if you look at automation versus adding staff, that's another decision point that a lot of companies have to make. And a few years ago, when times were a little bit tough, we talked with a lot of companies who had to make reductions in their workforce. A lot of times those reductions did come in administrative functions, but now that business is bouncing back, they're looking with the situation of now how do we support this rebound, this growth? We don't really want to add the headcount back to our company, and now they're looking at ways that maybe they can use automation instead. And really, the technology is out there, and it's mature enough, and it's a great time to be looking at that. So again, instead of adding heads to the department, they're discovering how AP can actually streamline how automation can actually streamline that invoice process. So with companies getting more and more complex, another thing that companies have to think about in terms of AP automation, we've got this list here to look at in terms of what are some of the particular challenges for a shared services center. So again, as companies are more and more complex, this vision of one company having one ERP, simply is not reality. At least that's not what we find when we work with our clients. So it sounds good in theory, but today companies are going global. There are mergers and acquisitions, and it's really become almost an everyday part of their activities to deal with all these different ERPs. So it's not unheard of for a company to manage as many as 5, 6, 7 ERP systems in use and have those in use across their global enterprise. Another thing to think about is that maybe even in your own company, you might run different variations of one ERP solution. So you may run the same ERP, but there are different flavors running throughout your organization. So they can be different enough that now when you're trying to centralize in the shared services organization, that can cause you a challenge. So that can challenge you from an operational standpoint. And another thing too, if you are a company lucky enough to have standardized on a standard and enterprise-wide ERP solution, still kind of working with the workflow that may be required worldwide and the different workflow tools that are out there, this can definitely complicate, continue to add complications to the initiative to to set up shared services. So what we find is integrating automated AP workflow that can have a huge impact on the ERP environment and kind of getting yourselves to a level of standardization where you may not have that. So if you can implement the automation on the AP side, you know, we can try and get away from some of that the differences that are being faced at the ERP level. Okay. So what do you stand to gain? You know, is automation really all it's cracked up to be? Is it worth all the trouble, basically? Of, you know, it does take some change. It takes some change management with employees and departments. So here's a summary of what we see that businesses can get from automating accounts payable. At the highest level there across the top, you can see that cutting AP operational and administrative costs by 40 to 60%. These are numbers that we see from our customers. Receiving and entering vendor invoices up to 75% faster. Again, that frees up time significantly, whether or not your initiative is to reduce your staff or handle growth with the same amount of staff, or take some of that same staff and apply them to more value-added tasks. And in the bottom here, you can see that other examples of things that you stand to gain is increased accuracy, lower overall costs. This will help you, too, in efforts to support regulatory compliance, which is important, reducing the time to process, improving service levels for your suppliers, and in this green box on the right, we call it greener docs, but certainly by going in an electronic format, which is automated and pushing less paper, you're certainly kind of like a bit of icing on the cake, helping out the environment as well. Let's take a look at how intelligent automation works, and that's kind of where we're getting into this kind of option that you have to the manual processes that we looked at. So AP automation technology captures automatically data such, and this is right off of the invoice, data such as vendor number, purchase order number, due date that might be needed for routing, and indexing. And that's when the invoice can come in a variety of different means, whether it's a fax, which is not as usual for invoices, but maybe an email, a scanned paper invoice, or some other type of electronic invoice arrives. So you don't need any predefined templates with an automation solution like this, which is important. The solution, so it's recognizing all these different types of formats and pulling the data automatically. So the solution then will check the extracted data to determine if that invoice is going to be a PO-based invoice or one that's without a PO. So in the case of a PO'd invoice, the solution can pull information and kind of tap into the ERP to compare what's on the invoice with what was originally on that purchase order that was generated. If it finds a perfect match, so all the information is lining up correctly, as far as the quantity and the price and all of that, the automation of a solution like this can automatically send that transaction in more or less a touchless fashion through to the ERP system, which can obviously save a huge amount of time as opposed to the manual process that we saw before, where everything is then handled manually around the company to make that same determination. So for invoices that don't match up with the purchase order, the solution can perform the necessary exception handling. So this is another important piece because there are always exceptions. So some of the exceptions might be checking to see if this invoice is a duplicate. So something could be flagging the system to say, hey, look out, we may have a duplicate here. It could be looking for if there are any discounts that can be applied for fast payment, or if that invoice needs to go through an approval process. Coding may be done. That can be done either inside or outside of the accounting department at this stage. If any additional approval is required, the invoice can be transferred through the office electronically with an automation platform like this, so you know exactly where it is in the approval process. That's some of the visibility I spoke about earlier. And it gets to the right people as quickly as possible to get those approvals collected as soon as you can, so that you can finally get to that point where you can make the payment. So throughout this entire process, when it's automated like this, whether the invoice is PO-based or non-PO-based, the solution is attaching information inside the ERP system. So whatever archiving solution you use, whether you're using the platform's built-in archive, or if you're linking to another archive that you may already have in place, you've got all the image, all the information, the audit trail, etc., kind of consolidated back with this invoice, and all that information is consolidated back into your ERP. So I mentioned visibility. I mentioned audit trails. What's nice about automation as well is that you now have this wonderful ability to report on this whole process because you've got the visibility, because you have the audit trail. So that's kind of a high level of what the automation can potentially look like. Now, right now, I want to take a little bit more time to talk about in detail the workflow piece. If you remember back to earlier in the presentation, I mentioned that the industry analyst reports that we find states that 80% of AP processing time is spent in this area. So so this can be especially troublesome too if you're managing workflow in a shared services environment, where now you're trying to manage workflow that might be between different divisions, different locations in different time zones, etc. So let's talk a little bit more about workflow and how you want to make some decisions here. So you basically get to that point where you'll have two choices of workflow. So you can install a tool, or some ERPs have some workflow that can be utilized within the ERP system, or you have an option to use workflow that's tied in outside of the ERP system, that's tied into the automation that we just spoke about. At first glance, you might think, well, I want to run that workflow inside my ERP. That might seem like a logical approach, but I do want to point out some important factors to consider. So for example, we mentioned companies that might run several ERP systems within the organization. So having workflow inside of the ERP, that can all of a sudden mean workflow inside of several ERP instances. So that can cause a lot of efficiency, that can cause a lot of IT drain to manage that, an additional cost and consistency issues over time. So especially in this case, companies may ultimately choose an external solution for AP because of that. It'll help reduce the cost and the risk involved in implementing the workflow. Unaffected by changes to the ERP implementation, that's another good aspect of workflow outside of the ERP system. So if you're upgrading to a new version or doing other changes in your ERP system, when you've got your web-based your workflow as a web-based type of solution outside of your ERP, it can remain untouched while you have to make maybe some other IT landscape changes. So some other advantages of external AP workflow. One of the great things is you can access that information for approvals anytime and anywhere. So with external AP workflow, buyers, managers, people who have to be in that workflow chain are notified by email when invoices need to be approved. So they can check, comment on, add to, reject, or sign off on invoices really around the clock from any location. This web-based workflow offers the ability to create pretty much also a very clean matrix for automation of the approval process. So again, I mentioned before that if it's certain dollar amounts or whatever the decision points are, or the criteria or the logic in your company is for workflows, that can be built in automatically. And another thing that's kind of nice is that you don't need to be an ERP user to approve the invoices. So if you've got workflow outside the ERP system, it really allows users to access all the information that they need to make a decision to approve the invoice without the need to actually log into the ERP. And that can really reduce the need to add ERP seats in the execution of an AP automation project. And users also have a single access point for invoice data along with the original document image. So they can see all that they can see it all together. And then they also can see the history of what actions and what workflow has already taken place. So as a result, companies can share AP data across business applications. You can include purchasing and other departments that in that workflow that may not be traditional ERP users. You can include pre- and post-processing steps in the workflow. Extend that approval workflow to remote staff, even mobile devices, which is more and more important in our environment. And then view all those archived invoices, the audit trail that I mentioned. All of that can be seen outside the ERP application, including running all sorts of different reports on that data. Continue on to other advantages that we have seen firsthand that people can leverage with external AP workflow. It has to do with deployment. So when you're deploying via a web browser and you've got now a familiar environment, that can help simplify training and really help with user acceptance. I mentioned anytime you're going to do automation or changes like this, that is going to be a big consideration, is making things easier for your users and for whose lives you're kind of making some changes to. So people who aren't as familiar with ERP applications, they may not be as ready to embrace that ERP interface. So having more of an intuitive web-based environment can make things easier on those people and avoid confusion and errors and even user rejection at the end of the day. Also, having workflow inside the ERP, if you're looking at inside ERP workflow solutions, they need data to work with, and that data at some point does need to be extracted from the paper invoices, from the emails and everything that comes in. So if you're using one tool to do that and another tool then to be doing the workflow and the approvals, now people are learning two systems. So that applies as well to AP personnel if they've got the burden now of dealing with two different applications and interfaces, as opposed to validating, if they're validating and recognizing information in one system, that can be a lot easier on them and just make for a much more simplified approach. So in the end, consolidating AP workflow logic in one place, that can help you tighten up controls, can also help you operate independently of your ERP environment, which may be varied. It may be a challenge to do that, yet you can still be fully integrated with the various ERP systems that you need to integrate with. And an external workflow solution can also incorporate legacy systems, as well as any new business units that come on board through acquisitions, and then you don't have to duplicate all that workflow logic across the organization. So now we're going to move on to the next section of the presentation. We're going to talk a little bit more about cloud at this point. So I'm going to hand off to Susie to take us through another poll question.
Thank you very much indeed, Renee. So coming up on your screen now, let's have a bit of a discussion about how familiar you are with cloud-based technology today. So how familiar are you with cloud-based solutions for AP automation? Very familiar, we are live with cloud technology today. Familiar, but we are not live with cloud technology today. Not that familiar, I have limited knowledge, or not familiar at all. So if you could tick the box most appropriate to the level of familiarity that you currently have on cloud-based technology. I'll be closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the results coming up on your screen now. Interestingly, only 6% are not familiar at all. So 50% not that familiar, have limited knowledge. 11% are very familiar and actually have cloud-based technology live within their AP environment. Interesting result. Back to you, please, Renee.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. And yeah, I'm going to go ahead and on our next slide talk a little bit about what I'm referring to as the cloud, which will help for some of you that are not that familiar, and it's been talked a lot about. It is out there in the IT space being talked about, but where we don't see it talked about too much is in the AP space, where the business users are going to learn more about technology. So what exactly is the cloud? So it's really internet-based computing. You're going to hear it called on-demand, cloud computing. You're going to also hear it be called SaaS, or software as a service. And as Susie mentioned at the very beginning of the call, a lot of us are using those type solutions in our own personal life. We're logging into different applications on the web. Well, this is kind of that same concept, but for business and for AP. So in this case, you have no software, you have no hardware to install. So if you're going this route, you can be up and running with solutions in a much quicker time frame. And so you can see a positive impact on your business in little to no time at all. The other nice part about that is that it's scalable, it's secure, reliable, and can be a lot more affordable than bringing all that infrastructure into your company. So if you are an organization where you don't have a lot of IT resources at your fingertips, nor resources to maintain solutions on an annual basis, this can be a great option for you. And then a lot of the payment is on a pay-as-you-go model. So you've got some upfront costs as far as getting implemented, but then you're paying for what you use, and that can be very attractive to companies. So why does the cloud make sense for AP, and especially AP environments that are in shared services? First being capital versus operational expense. So AP, it's not a revenue-generating function. We've already established that. So if you've got an opportunity to lower your upfront investment, especially this means that this can bring this type of functionality to very large enterprises, but as well to small and medium businesses. You can also get this automation and achieve a lot of the benefits that we spoke about with minimal IT support. And like I said, I know in companies it's very competitive to get IT resources. So if you can put in a solution that doesn't tax those resources where you don't have to compete for them, it can be very attractive. And if you think about, even though shared services is centralized, you are getting information from a lot of different places, and you've got this distributed process where you're bringing information in. So having this ability via the cloud to be scanning from all different locations, but getting all that information into a central location in an easy fashion can be very attractive. And then, as I mentioned before, as we talked through workflow, being able to then expand that approval workflow, again, via the cloud, via a web-based and easy-to-use environment to all different company locations in a secure manner with a really nice audit trail. That also is another real important reason why the cloud can really help out your shared services organization. Kind of takes us into that third bullet point of this concept of control and visibility. So there have been some companies who've decided maybe they want to take their AP processing and actually outsource that. What we're talking about as a cloud solution is not the same as business process outsourcing, where you can tend to lose a lot of the control and visibility that you have over your business process. You want to automate, you want to improve your process, but you want to keep that control. You want to keep that ability to have that day-to-day knowledge of exactly what's happening in your business. And having a cloud solution and a centralized platform for your shared services center can really help out a lot with that. And if you continue to look at AP automation as a cloud service, I mentioned before as another way that people call that is the software as a service approach. Again, users anywhere in your organization can leverage kind of this document process automation platform really at any time to process vendor invoices. So whether or not your business is geographically spread out, whether again, I mentioned different time zones, things like that, all business units can share in the benefits of having the visibility, tighter controls, and as well as supporting for better cash management and reducing costs all over the organization. So going with a cloud service for AP automation, it can also open the door to other cloud services, including outbound fax, postal mail, all sorts of different documents and processes that you work on in your company. And we see that at Esther. We definitely see that a lot of companies start with automating one process, and in a lot of cases it is AP. It's a great starting point. And then from there they'll leverage that cloud platform to a whole array of other document processes throughout their company. So another thing with using the cloud in a shared services environment is it can really help you simplify the setup of shared services. So with more and more companies making decisions to integrate their business operations on a global view in their shared services centers, it's really something that's been done a lot. Even more and more companies moving toward those. So by definition, though, we did talk about some of those challenges where the shared services centers are having to interact and communicate regularly with users in their company from all different geographical areas, and in some cases users who kind of predate some of the automation that has been put in place. So as a result, shared service centers are often including multiple systems. They're having to incorporate different application instances and different types of environments. So having a tool for AP workflow, I mentioned before, outside the ERP system can support all of those different regional and worldwide users and address all those different systems. Another huge benefit of a cloud service is that you're looking at something that's 24/7, 365 in terms of monitoring that service, because that's being done externally for you, making sure that it's running and operating like it should. So as a company, you don't have to be worrying about that. And that also means that the uptime is guaranteed for your users wherever they are in the world. So now let's take a few customer case studies. That always helps really drive home the point. And the first one I'm going to speak about is Farmland Foods, and they're an international pork processing company. Their challenge, they were processing a pretty nice amount of invoices here, about 7,000 to 8,000 invoices being processed per week, and they knew that they were expanding operations. So they needed to keep pace with that expansion without adding headcount. Now for them, paper was really a challenge. They had paper everywhere. The invoices coming in were paper. When they went to file everything, it was paper. As things were being passed around for workflow, it was paper. And they also were dealing with a lot of different plants. So at their corporate location, like a shared service center, they were processing the invoices for all these different plants. So the top priority, they were really interested in increasing the accuracy and the speed of their AP operations. And really on top of that as well, giving them a much greater idea of visibility. So they knew their manual methods didn't give them that. They really needed to speed things up and bring more visibility to the process. One of the reasons that they looked at our solution and were interested in it is that we had all the different pieces that they needed, from the actual capture of the invoice to help with the processing, the workflow piece, as well as the archive, and tight integration with SAP, which was the ERP that they're using. So for them also, I mentioned companies kind of expanding that automation. So the next step for them was automating into their accounts receivable process so they could see future expansion. The next case study that I'd like to speak about is a company called Albemarle, and they're a global developer, and they also manufacture and market specialty chemicals. So they had 2 shared services centers. They were processing about 12,000 invoices a month, multiple languages. They were doing all this, though, on a very aging infrastructure, and they needed to make some changes. They, too, had issues with visibility, as well as productivity, and they wanted to make some improvements. So they looked to Esther to help them meet some objectives. They were going for this ability to do the matching that I talked about earlier, so they could go touchless and really speed up their processing. They had some aggressive goals of wanting to process 2 to 3 times more invoices per day. And they really wanted to make sure that they were paying invoices in a timely basis. And this is an interesting point. They knew that they had some suppliers who weren't following invoicing rules that they had set up and guidelines, but they had no way to really track that and gain visibility into that. So our solution helped them do that. And finally, a case study with a company called Spectrum, and they're a global conglomerate of consumer products. They're a manufacturer, and their paper invoices were sent by mail to individuals in various locations. So they were centrally processing invoices, but this whole communication process that I talked about with all these other locations was being done through physical means. So they really lost the whole sense of visibility into where invoices were. They were running behind in processing them as well. So it took a long time to process and really understand what was happening with the system. So by creating a shared service center, so they actually took 2 steps at once. They created their shared service center and implemented the automation of Esther's AP solution. So now they were able to have all invoices come to one central location for imaging and to start that electronic approval process. All that information then is captured and stored electronically back in their SAP system, and the invoices then are immediately available to anyone in the company who needs to see them. So now as we get into the final section of our presentation, we're winding things down here. One of the things that I wanted to touch on a little bit, we've been focused, if you look at this whole concept of order to cash and procure to pay, so we've been really only talking about one business process as far as accounts payable on the bottom right-hand side of the presentation. But really, a lot of these business processes run on documents, and a lot of these business processes really do lend themselves to being brought into a shared services environment. What's great about a solution such as ours is having a single cloud platform to manage all these different types of business processes. So you can really now start to look at kind of extending this platform that has all the different types of technologies that you can see around the circle here. You've got all of these technologies unified in one platform that now you can really start to leverage the shared services organization that you've set up and apply it to different business processes. So that's a great way to also add improvement and add value in your company. And we call this, these are more Esther's terms, but a Bestofsweet solution. So kind of a different visual, but saying something similar here. You've got the business processes here along your left, the horizontal bars, and then in the gray boxes, you've got all those different technologies. So in the case of a Bestofsweet solution and a cloud solution, you're able to have all of those technologies integrated with one vendor. Everything's connected. You've got visibility and transparency throughout the process. And at the end of the day, too, you're alleviating your IT group first because you've hopefully decided that a cloud solution is beneficial to you. But even if you do decide to still go on premise with a traditional software solution, having everything integrated such as this can really help your IT keep your IT costs in check and help you avoid what you see next here in this picture, which can be kind of a mishmash of lots of vendors covering lots of different processes, and you can just kind of see from the picture that that's not going to be real conducive to keeping costs low and keeping things streamlined in your organization. So I mentioned before deployment options. You've got this option here with a system that we talked about with a platform that you can have traditional software as a choice. You can have 100% cloud as a choice. You can also have a mix of that, and we do have customers who choose that, and there are lots of times when that can make sense. The other thing that's really important to think about is a phased implementation. And that's where you can kind of pick and choose how you want to implement as you kind of ease some of this into your organization. So one more thing to kind of get you thinking about automation and how you might apply it in your organization. We're going to do one more poll question, and I'll hand that off to Susie.
Thank you very much. Renee, so coming up on your screen now, please. What type of AP automation solution would your company likely implement? Scanning, there's multiple choices here as well, so if a number of boxes apply to you, please feel free to tick as many as you want. Scanning, electronically archiving vendor invoices, archiving and removing manual data entry with intelligent data capture, full AP automation, like e-archiving, automated entry and workflow. So which ones are likely to be implemented within your own organization? Which ones are the kind of the technologies that you're looking to be moving towards in the next 12 or so months? I think that the box is most appropriate to you. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the results coming up on your screen now. So you can see, yeah, 41% of you scanning and 53% of responses full AP automation, so kind of end-to-end automation from receipt right the way through. Interesting results. Back to you, please, Renee.
Great, great. It's interesting to see there how things are kind of split all over the board, which kind of, it gets us to this point of thinking about, well, how do you take the next step? How do you kind of practically start and pick which area you want to start in? And because you can choose to start in a lot of those different areas. So the first thing we recommend to customers is first start by making sure you understand your existing process. Map this out. Talk to as many people as you can, not just managers, but people who are processing invoices all day long. Find those touch points. The next thing you want to do is look at that process and say, wow, how can we make improvements? Because the last thing you want to do is automate a process or take to a shared service center a process that doesn't make sense. Third, know the cost of your manual process. So once you kind of map that out and you know that it's manual, you know that it's painful, take the time to track how many invoices you process, how many mistakes you make, what do those mistakes cost your company, what is the cost of all the paper that you're sending, and all the time that you're spending in terms of managing workflow. This can come in real handy later when you're making the business case up the management chain. And then prioritizing based on cost and return. So the next thing you want to do is say, okay, well, where do we feel the most pain? And where can we stand to see the quickest gain in terms of cost and return? Other things you can do to kind of get going is figuring out how much technology you actually need. It was interesting to see in the poll how some of you are looking to start in different areas. You may already have some automation in place. So figure out where, what steps and what automation pieces are going to help you the most, and what do you need right away versus what can you phase into. This comes without saying, understand your company's budgeting cycle. That's going to be pretty straightforward, just knowing when that planning occurs. Building your business case for upper management. I mentioned before, getting a real good understanding of your current process, the cost of your current process. That will really, really help you figure out how much you can save. And when we work with companies, we'll take those original numbers of what their manual process looks like, and we can help you figure out the cost savings that you stand to gain when you get into automation. And also, web seminars like this, white papers, there's a lot of other analyst research and other types of statistics that you can pull together for validation as well. So hopefully that's some practical advice on how you can start to go back into your organization and take some steps to look at your organization, how you might find some improvement areas. A quick overview of Esther. We talked a lot about paper and automation. We are all about helping companies quit paper. That's our motto. People get it. I'm sure if you look around your organization, you happen to see a lot of business processes that are still run on paper. We do find that shared services organizations, that's a great step toward finding a lot of efficiency and improvements, but we want to help you take that next step to take the paper then out of those processes. So you can see we've worked with a lot of different customers. We've been in business for over 25 years. We've been a pioneer in the software as a service or the cloud environment, doing that for over 8 years. So it's definitely not anything that's new to us. As I finalize with some key takeaways, just to kind of wrap us up, AP automation. So if you look at, automating that piece, it's going to bring you visibility that you haven't had before. It's going to bring you time and cost savings that are going to be critical to your business, and a whole lot of great process control to your AP process. If you're looking at a cloud option, which I highly recommend that you at least take a look at, they're ideal for shared services centers. As a summary here, you can implement this automation with a much lower upfront investment. You can scan and enter invoices and handle workflow with all different locations, geographically as well as in different time zones and things like that. You can also handle that problem that we talked about, where throughout your company you maybe have multiple ERPs or instances of ERPs. And then certainly with a cloud solution, you're working any time of day. And then finally, they're leveraging your AP solution to automate other document-driven processes. So taking a cloud platform like this, looking at your shared services center and saying, wow, what can we do next? How can we consolidate some and automate some other key processes within our organization? So with that, I've got my contact information here on the screen. Feel free to reach out. I'm going to pass back to Susie right now for questions.
Thank you so much indeed. And just before we do move to questions, I just want to remind everybody that we have a raffle here, and the lucky winners get to win a $2,000 ticket to the Summit for Leaders in Financial Services, which is coming up on October 10th, 11th, 12th. And all you need to do is answer this question correctly to be entered into that raffle. So coming up on your screen now, which of the following are Esther's clients? Sony, Starbucks, Honda, L'Oreal, Hitachi. So just fill in the ones that you think are Esther's clients, and I'll be closing the poll shortly. And just to remind you that the winners, 10 lucky winners, get free passes to the Summit for Leaders in Financial Services. Right, just whilst you're doing that, let's move directly to questions. So Renee, I've got a question here. What are the security features of the cloud and kind of position against kind of hacking prevention or servers crashing? What's the kind of security that ESCO and also maybe cloud-based technology generally can provide in terms of comfort to the shared services market?
That's a great question, and it's one of the first things people think about. They think, I'd rather manage this on my own. I know how to take care of it. But really, you're talking about companies such as Esther who've been doing this for a long, long time. We've put all the necessary controls in place, and a lot of times, and what we can do is share all that with customers in detail so that they have that level of security. The other thing that you want to do is you want to make sure you talk with providers who've got the right levels of certification. There are several certifications out there for companies offering cloud solutions that are third-party endorsements, basically, that the companies are following all the things that they need to do to ensure that clients' data is secure and that their systems are going to be up and running.
That's great. Thank you so much, Renee. And I'm just going to close this poll down, and I'm just going to share the results there. And just to remind you all that you've been answering kind of 76% of you saying Sony, etc. Of course, they're all ESCO's clients, so that's great. It's a shame that we've run out of time for questions, but I do know that Renee and the team are going to be available to follow up with you afterwards for questions if needed. So I'd just like to say thank you again to Renee, and working with her has been an absolute joy. And also just to remind you that we've got a few webinars coming up to make sure that you're available for that. And we look forward to welcoming you next time. Thank you very much, and goodbye.